Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for being here. And I want to thank GlobalMindED for creating space for this conversation. The theme of this conference is Our Democracy, Unifying, Uplifting, and Uniting. When most people hear the word democracy, they think about elections, voting, public policy, and also civic participation. Now, those things matter, but for young people, democracy is experienced long before they ever cast a ballot. Democracy is experienced through institutions. It's experienced in schools. It's experienced through interactions with the public system. It is experienced through access to opportunity, and it is experienced through whether young people believe the institutions around them that are designed for them are accountable to them and invested in their future. And for boys and young men of color, that question remains especially important. Because when opportunity becomes unpredictable, then trust becomes fragile. When belonging becomes inconsistent, then participation becomes less likely. And when institutions repeatedly fail to deliver on their purposes, then democracy itself is weakened. Before we begin, I want to clarify a concept that is central to my own work. When I talk about predictability, I'm not talking about guaranteed outcomes because an institution cannot guarantee success. But what institutions can do is create predictable access to opportunity, to support, to belonging, accountability, and pathways to success. Young people should not have to depend on luck. Predictability means a young person's access to opportunities should not change dramatically based on which classroom they enter, which neighborhood they grow up in, which adult they encounter, or which system they happen to touch first. The question is whether our institutions consistently respond to boys and young men of color with opportunity, with support, with belief, or whether those experiences remain largely dependent on chance. So today's conversation is about what democracy requires of our institutions if young men and boys of color are to experience belonging, opportunity, and full participation. I'm honored to be joined by an extraordinary panel of leaders whose work touches nearly every major system that shapes these outcomes. Before I introduce our panelists, let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Dr. Dedrick Sims. I am the CEO of the Sims-Fayola Foundation. My work focuses on helping schools, organizations, and public systems improve outcomes for boys and young men of color by examining how belief, structure, and practice shape belonging, predictability, and opportunity. That work led to the development of the SIMS framework, which is a systems design approach that helps leaders understand how institutions produce and reproduce outcomes they are getting and what it takes to redesign them. So it is my honor to moderate today's conversation. With that, let me introduce our panelists. The first panelist is Dr. Cito Narcisse. Dr. Cito serves as the interim chief of schools for Denver Public Schools. Throughout his career, he has led school systems and improvement efforts across the country, helping institutions strengthen outcomes of belonging, accountability, and opportunity for students. Dr. Michael Giles he serves as the superintendent of Aurora Public Schools. His career spans education, counseling, leadership, and juvenile justice, giving him a very unique perspective on how systems shape the lives of young people. Sheriff Elias Diggins. Sheriff serves as the sheriff of the city and county of Denver. His career in public safety and community leadership provides important insight into how institutions can build trust, accountability, and opportunity. And Mr. Darius Wise. Darius is the president and CEO of Red Rocks Credit Union. His leadership across business, finance, and community development brings a critical perspective on economic mobility and pathways to opportunity. And finally, our former Mayor Michael Hancock, who served 3 terms as the mayor of Denver and now leads the Hancock Foundation. His work focuses on education, economic development, workforce readiness, and creating opportunities that strengthen communities and future generations. Please join me in welcoming our guests. So our first segment is called What Are Boys Telling Us About Our System? And Dr. Narcisse, I want to begin with you. You've led schools, you've led school systems and large-scale improvement efforts across the country. Today, you help oversee teaching and learning across Denver Public Schools. Across those experiences, what concerns you most about the current trajectory about young men and boys of color? And what do you believe systems leaders still misunderstand about what those young men are telling us?
Thanks for that question. Hello, everyone. I'm here representing our superintendent, Dr. Alex Marrero, for the Denver Public Schools. What I would say is one of the biggest concerns I have, I've been in 9 school districts across the country. And so what I have seen is the biggest fear I always have is black and brown boys disconnecting as early as possible. And what I think we try to do is we look at metrics to try to determine when they should when do they disconnect. But the reality is the metrics that we use in K-12 is actually too late. There's this thing I call the exit before the exit. We created a system and a design in the K-12 space to predetermine if boys should be on track. But the reality is we kind of miss that the system is almost designed to tell them that they shouldn't be there already. And that becomes a bigger issue. If you look at some of the data that we look at, for example, whether it's longitudinal or some of those things, there are predictors that we try to look for, early warning indicators that say, hey, they're not on track. You can see that based on literacy rates in literacy rates from the 3rd grade. If the child's not on the 3rd grade, I'm sure everybody's heard the cradle to prison pipeline, right? So, those jails are built on that. Well, the reason I say it's the exit before the exit is because I think that there's a whole psychological miss that we have, that we don't get, that black and brown boys are actually told from the time that they're in preschool that they should not be a part of an ecosystem that expects them to do exceptionally well. And that happens through messaging, social media, all these other components. And they tend to connect closer to entertainment, sports, all these other factors, because the reality is they don't see people that look like them. They don't engage with people that talk about the work. They're not put in opportunities to help them accelerate. And so when you talk about the trajectory component, my biggest fear is that, we're not thinking that deeply about kids from the time to the day that they're born around acceleration. Especially with black and brown boys, they're actually working in a system that's perpetually designed to tell them that they should not achieve where they need to achieve. And if they do achieve, like many of us here, they think it's luck, right? And so the environment you create really co-creates this whole construct, and I don't think that the K-12 system has done a great job trying to set that up.
Thank you for that. Dr. Giles, let's stick with education. You spend most of your time helping turn strategy into practice across one of Colorado's most diverse school districts. What are you seeing inside of schools as it relates to boys of color that should concern all of us?
Thank you for the question. Good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to make sure I'm not yet a doctor, so Mike is fine. But thank you for speaking that into the space. What's concerning me within our systems, I'm going to start with mindsets, number one. What do we believe about our young black and brown boys, males that are walking through our hallways? And the truth is, I'd love to say that, you ask an educator, you ask an adult, do you believe in every child? And of course, nobody's going to say, no, I don't. But when it comes to looking every child in the eye, our black and brown boys, do we truly believe that, number one, they can achieve? Number two, I have the ability to help them achieve. And so a lot of the work that I've tried to do over my many years in education is start with the mindset work. What do you really believe, and how is that showing up in your practice? And I know mindset alone does not change outcomes, but that's a starting place for me. A second place is just the systems within our institution. How are we intentionally designing opportunities for our children to have not only access, but the support and the resources that they need to thrive, and to thrive in a way that is authentic to them as well. Because we lay all these standards that may be set by the state. Sometimes we impose these different standards that are supposed to tell us whether our children are smart, whether they can read, whether they can calculate, or whatever the case might be. But sometimes those are artificial, and sometimes those are standards that are set by somebody else's measure, as opposed to really looking at what it is that our children are able to demonstrate. And so really trying to push our system to think about that. What are the opportunities for our students to demonstrate their brilliance in an authentic manner? And then in addition to that, some of the other things that we're trying to do is really celebrate where we do have success. Because even though we're talking about missed opportunities, we're talking about lack of access, we have several of our students who are doing really well, who are accessing opportunities. And it's not only because they have somebody who pulled them along, but some of them are actually succeeding because of the design of the system. So how do we tap into that and help other young men see those opportunities or those success stories as well?
Thank you for that last point. Oftentimes when you hear conversations about young men of color, it's from a deficit narrative. But there are a lot of brilliant young men of color who are doing amazing things, and they don't get the airtime or get the conversation that they deserve. And so I really appreciate you talking about that, Mike. Sheriff Diggins. By the time a young man encounters the justice system, he's already interacted with schools, he's already interacted with the community, organizations, employers, and other public institutions. What do these interactions tell us about where systems are succeeding and where they are falling short?
Thank you for the question, and good morning, everyone. Over my 32 years, what I consistently see is folks that have fell through the cracks in the education system, which leads to their involvement in the criminal justice system, which then begins to carry them into adulthood, and unfortunately, they can't break the cycle. We did a study a number of years ago about traumatic brain injuries, and the number or the percentage of people that were in our custody who had a TBI, and it was astounding. Between 60 to 75% of the people in our custody had that. Well, the researchers at DU also recognized that folks that have TBIs generally begin to have educational disabilities because their learning gets off track. And so if they're in school and folks don't recognize that, they would perceive their behaviors as acting out because the child may have a slow processing disorder, or they may not be able to understand what the teacher's talking about. And so they react to being not focused on related to that traumatic brain injury, and then they begin to get into trouble. And the next thing you know, they turn into teenagers, get involved in the criminal justice system, and the ball begins to roll from there. So what we're focused on now is beginning to help those folks understand what their disabilities are at the earliest stages possible, to give them coping mechanisms, but also get them engaged in counseling that can help them to move through adulthood, and to also educate others about the prevalence of TBIs in people that are involved in the criminal justice system, and encourage school districts to do more to help those students as well. If we focus on providing the resources at an earlier stage, what the good doctor talked about before, with us basing prison beds on third grade students, we can begin to break that cycle as a community. It's very, very expensive to house someone in the criminal justice system, up to $254 per day, versus helping a child as they're progressing through the education system to learn what their disability might be, to help them with those educational deficits and put them on a track for success rather than to become a person involved in the criminal justice system.
I'm one of those guys, thank you, Sheriff, I'm one of those guys who think that neither of these institutions can exist in a silo, in a silo, in order to support young people, but also to support our community in general. School system needs to work with law enforcement. Law enforcement need to understand what's happening in the school systems. Those who are leading our communities from elected positions need to understand what's happening in order to impact policy. This needs to be a conversation that happens all the time. But too often we operate in silos, and we don't see how our decisions impact or sometimes undermine what's happening in another sector. I find it fascinating that law enforcement is having conversations about TBIs, about a medical phenomenon, and that you're not just having kids come through and go through the system and not recognizing what the underlying issue is. So I commend you for looking at it that way and looking to find a solution for them a different solution to recidivism, right? Okay, they're in here for this. Let's figure out what kind of care and support they need. So thank you, Sheriff. Darius, from your perspective of economic mobility and workforce opportunity, what are you seeing that should cause leaders to pay attention as it relates to young men of color?
Yeah, Dedrick, thanks for having us all, and I feel privileged to be on the panel with these great men. I would say, and good afternoon to everyone. I would say there's a lot, but I would go back to the foundation. I think fundamentally, where we have failed is the deterioration of the family unit. Black and brown young men are growing up in homes with single mothers or without a two-parent household. I think that's where I see the biggest gap, because the education for each of our young black, brown boys starts in the home. I've got two sons, 18 and 19. They're African-American young men, and my 19-year-old is a sophomore at Ole Miss studying finance and accounting. My 18-year-old is a rising freshman at ASU. He's going to be studying biology. These two young men have a fighting chance because they've grown up in a home where I love what you said, the expectation for greatness and acceleration and thriving is present. It's there. I think I'm mentoring a young man who is 19 years old. He's expecting a child in July from an 18-year-old young woman. He doesn't have a GED, and he's involved in the justice system. His mother just passed of liver failure, of drinking herself into the grave. This young the odds are stacked against him, and he knows that. But he's got a fighting chance because he has someone in his life who is fighting for him. No significant change happens without significant relationship. And so the economic system, when you think about the economic system, where are our young black, brown, and our young black and brown young men taught about finances? Where does that start?
Yep, or where it should start.
Where should it start? It should start in the home.
Yep.
The secondary place that it should start is in the education system. How many of our schools are teaching financial literacy? Very few. And so I think this is a systemic problem that starts in the home first.
I really appreciate that perspective. We often talk to our boys when we have conversations about financial literacy. We are keenly aware that our relationship to money growing up in our community is not what it could have been. Sitting around our table growing up, we did not have conversations about stocks or annuities or your money working for you. It was how do we rob Peter to pay Paul, or work 2 or 3 jobs to make the ends meet, and that was our relationship with money. And I think that when we have conversations with young men about stocks or investing or annuities, it's the deer in the headlights. But it's what I want to see because it gives us an opportunity to pour into them and help them to understand how money should work for you. So I really appreciate that. And I think those are the kind of conversations that should be happening around the dinner table or any table inside the house. Mayor Hancock, you've spent decades leading at the city level and working across sectors. What concerns you most about where we are today as it relates to young men and boys of color?
Thanks, Dr. Sims, for that question. And let me just say, I'm taking notes because every one of these brothers up here have said, I think, some pretty interesting and important things that help further this conversation. But hopefully we can all take away from their statements to help be better people and serve our young people better. And I think that's the first thing I will share. Here's what I learned. As a father, now as a grandfather, as an uncle to young men of color, is at birth, and a wise man shared this with me, at birth, potential is universal, but through life, opportunity is not. And our young men and our families of young men of color have to understand that we have to be extra vigilant and diligent in making sure that we help them progress through life and understanding that there are going to be barriers in their lives that others don't face. And that's not an excuse for failure. I'll share a story that a good friend of mine who is a best-selling author, was a superstar, as a public speaker and is now the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, who authored a book, The Other Wes Moore, one of my favorite books to ever read. If you've not read it, you've got to read this book.
Yeah, it's an amazing book.
But he grew up in Baltimore in a neighborhood with a young man who was also named Wes Moore. The other Wes Moore is on death row for participating in an armed robbery at a jewelry store where a police officer was shot. He didn't shoot the officer, but he was involved in the crime. To write the book, the author went in to interview the Wes Moore on death row. Interviewed him dozens of times, and while I sat in a book club with some gang members here in Denver and brought Wes Moore here to sit with these young people to talk about the book, one of the young people asked Wes Moore, the author, what moment was pinnacle for you while interviewing the Wes Moore in jail? He said, that's easy. And this is the moment that I will never forget, and I will carry this for the rest of my life. He said, I asked the Wes Moore on death row, are we products of our environment? And he said the Wes Moore in jail didn't hesitate for a moment. He said, we're products of our expectations. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to young men of color, that's where what Darius just said and what Dr. Narcisa said and what Mike has said and the sheriff has said is that our expectations of how great we can be, where we should go, begins from birth. Telling our young men, you are great, you are worthy, and you come from good stuff. If you let them study their history, there is nothing in their history, in their DNA that says you're a failure. Nothing that says you can't survive the stuff that happens in your life. And so the expectations that our parents, our guardians, our siblings, our community members who shape you and say, you're going to be great, go be great, and our teachers have for our young men of color help to shape them. And so it is a societal thing. And I'll just finish on this, Dr. Sims. As mayor, I appointed a director of safety, Troy Riggs, who came to me and said, Mayor, I want to implement a whole different opportunity around public safety and justice. He said, I want a matrix. He said, because I can walk in neighborhoods and I can tell where the most endangered young men and women live. I can look at their environments, I can look at their educational outcomes, I can look at their health outcomes, I can look at whether their housing insecure, food insecure. I can tell you the moment we arrive at an emergency situation, this young man, this young woman is in danger. And if we learn to attack the expectations of our young people with a holistic approach, we'll do much better in getting outcomes for these young people. And so I think that's what our clarion call, our charge is for our community.
Thank you for that, Mayor. You know, one of the things that we tell our boys all the time is that it's not what they call you, it's what you answer to. And in order for that to live and be true, we have to do a lot of internal work with them, internal work that they may or may not have gotten before. But we truly believe that it is not what they call you, it is what you answer to. Moving on to segment 2, this is about belonging, trust, and democracy. We often talk about belonging as though it's a feeling. But belonging is also structural. It shows up in expectations and access and relationships, representation, second chances, opportunities, and investment. Dr. Narcisse, you've spent much of your career helping schools improve. If belonging was treated as a measurable outcome rather than a slogan, what indicators would tell you that a school is truly creating it?
Yeah, it's great. Belong is like the new buzzword now, I think. I always watch all these different words we've used in education. So it's interesting because belonging has always been felt like a feel-good thing. You know, I want the child to feel belonged, you know. But the reality is there are ways you can actually measure, if we could do that, belonging, having a child belong to a community, to a school, and those things. The first thing I would say is as simple as think about relational proximity. If we had to measure belonging, relational proximity would be getting a child to see an adult that connects with them 3 to 4 times a day, right? So if you especially look at this research that's been around specifically for Black and Latino boys, where if they connect with an adult 3 or 4 times a day, not just how you're doing, but how they're going through their livelihoods, the percentage of how well they will do, not only in school, but just as individual with affirmation and all that, goes 10 times exponent, 10x, as they would say. And you can measure that, right? You can measure that by, just seeing how many times they connect with and engage with whoever, right? That's an easy way to belonging on that. Another way that you probably could think about belonging that would really help would be also, you could probably measure about the types of people they engage with, right? I would suspect that everybody that's sitting in this room has had either a mentor or somebody that it's inspired them to be there. Yes, right? If you had a mentor, raise your hand. Yeah? Okay. So imagine you're seeing that constantly, right? And that affirmation, right? That gives you self-confidence. You feel good about yourself. Well, guess what? You can actually measure that. I can measure that based on the amount of staffing folks that connect with you in that day, right? The amount of people you do that, or the amount of people that you meet that are successful, like the mayor here, right? If I said I want to be a mayor one day, but I keep talking to other mayors, and guess what? I believe I'm going to be what? A mayor, right? Or a police officer, or a superintendent, or a successful business person. What's really interesting is the issue. What we've gotten better in the country is to articulate these things, but we haven't created a design for it to actually happen.
Yes.
Right? And so if we had to measure to your go back to your space, these are metrics I think we have to really think about as we put in to do things. But my fear all the time is Black boys and Latino boys don't have time to wait for us to create a strategic plan or to put certain things in place in order for that to happen. And so if we really want to make a move in that direction, you have to think about that element, not only that what goes on in schools, what goes on in the community, what goes on in other spaces. And that would be what I would say when you think about belonging, for it to not be a value statement, but for you to actually operationalize it.
Thank you for that. Dr. Giles, you are responsible, Mike Giles. As superintendent, you are responsible for the direction of the entire district, and indirectly, ultimately, I would argue the belonging of the students who are going through your district. Listening to what Dr. Narcisse says, like what's getting in the way of creating measures around belonging or establishing real authentic belonging in our school system today?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And not to be redundant, but I'm going to start again where I ended before around the mindsets and the beliefs about the importance of belonging. So even as an institution, how convinced are we, or how much do we believe that we have to create a strong sense of belonging for our students and their parents and guardians in order for them to truly thrive and take advantage of the learning opportunities? So a lot of work has gone into that, and I appreciate this question so much because as a new superintendent, when I came in, I went to the community and asked, what would it look like for our students to feel safe, seen, valued, and given the opportunities to thrive and supported to thrive? And I kept asking that question over and over again, got a lot of great feedback. And as we developed our strategic plan, just like anybody else in there has ever done, there are a lot of technical aspects, but what I also wanted to make sure is that we tapped into the adaptive aspects. So thinking about being safe, seen, valued, creating that sense of belonging is an adaptive focus that we place heavy emphasis on, so much so that we wrote that into our strategic plan. So when you ask how do we measure that, we're doing that. We created a survey that goes out to our students 3 times a year, to their families 3 times a year, to our staff 3 times a year, to ask, do you have connections? Do you feel a sense of belonging in the learning environment? And then we talk also about what is regulation and support for that. But we're measuring that in real time so we can make real-time adjustments on the spot from a systemic level and in each individual school when we see evidence of that not happening. So it can definitely be measured. Other evidence of belonging, right now we're looking at attendance. Our attendance rate has dropped. And my question has become, why are our kids choosing to be somewhere else than here? And some of our kids that we've been able to tap into, they tell us because we don't feel like we're reflected in the school, we don't feel like we belong there, we don't feel like we're valued there, so they're choosing to be other spaces. So I won't even say the hope, but the theory of action is that we focus on creating greater sense of belonging, creating those structures, then our students will choose to be in school, and they'll choose to engage in the learning opportunities that are presented before them. But that's just a long way of saying that we can do this. It's very important. We have to believe it's important. And then we have to hold ourselves accountable to actually looking for that on a routine basis.
I appreciate that answer, and it speaks to the Sims framework, which is belief, structure, and practice, or belief structure practice, alignment, and predictability. And so you just named that, right? I believe this, and to have the structures to put in place to measure it, and then we're going to practice it and actually do it. And then that creates alignment and ultimately the sense of belonging and predictability that a young man could feel safe and could almost predict the level of support that he will get in a school, right? So I appreciate that. Mayor Hancock, last question for this segment. What does democracy lose when large numbers of boys of color stop believing institutions will work for them?
First of all, it's scary. It's scary for us, and it's scary for democracy. We are seeing it played out today, to answer your question. This attempt to abridge, this attempt to scare off, to block people's access to the ballot box is a scary situation, and quite frankly, the greatest threat to democracy is not China, it's not Russia, it's not Iran, it's the lack or the abridgment of one's right to vote. And the reality is that we need to, nothing was scarier for me than when I was campaigning for office and I would meet an African-American brother or sister on the street and they would share that they cannot vote or they don't vote. That crushed me. It crushed my soul because I know that our road to the ballot box is paved by the blood of those who fought so hard to give us that right. And oftentimes I never responded this way, but I would go home and say, you know, we don't have that right. The one thing we don't have a right to do, or the privilege to do, is not vote. Too many people die to give us that right. So it's scary for me because of the community that I come from. It's scary for those young men because we just sit back and we only complain or and watch as the world goes by and don't feel like we have any power. And the last thing I'll say about this point, Dr. Sims, there is no greater threat to us as human beings, to our democracy, to the safety of our families, than someone who is without hope. And if I lose my right to vote, then you have taken at least the foundation of that hope, and you've stomped it. And so the present level powers can't do nothing unless we allow them to do it. Dr. King once said, no one can ride your back unless it's bent. If you straighten up and go vote every day, with the lines they draw in Louisiana, in Mississippi, in Alabama, and other places in the nation will be lessened because the power of the vote. And so we have to encourage engagement from a very young age, and we have to let them know that their voice matters and is worthy, and the vote is the most powerful tool you have.
You know, that you've lifted up a real challenge right now. The young men that we engage with, and young people in general, are really kind of apathetic about voting. Yep. You know, I'm not going to vote because it's not going to count, or it doesn't matter, or they're going to do what they want to do. And I'll just put this question out there for the audience. Like, we're not going to answer it, but what do you do when you hear a young person say that, whether it's your friend, someone that's in your ecosystem, someone that you are responsible for helping navigate life? What do you do? Do you challenge them at the risk of your friendship or relationship, or do you just allow it to go by? So that's a question I just want to put out there for you. Let's move to our last segment here, building a fortified talent pipeline. Let's move from diagnosis to design. If we are redesigning the pathway from childhood to adulthood, specifically for young men of color, what would need to change? And anyone can chime in on that. What would need to change if we're designing a pathway from childhood to adulthood, given our current realities? What would need to change specifically for young men and boys of color?
I would say something that Mayor Hancock and I both had growing up, which was the ability to see greatness and to touch it. This is what I mean by that. I remember being at an event where Mayor Webb was speaking, and he called Michael Hancock on stage, and we were young, really young. Michael Hancock still had hair back then. And he said, one day, this young man is going to be the mayor. We need to continue to infuse hope into our young people so that they meet the expectation, and to take these opportunities that we have in the places that we are and to touch every young person of color that we can along the way while we temporarily hold these seats to tell them there is a path for you to become whatever you want to be, and to help them and to encourage other people to ensure that that young person becomes whoever they want to be. And so I think it's up to us to take that mantle of leadership, to step in and to encourage others, not just black men, but people who have the ability to touch these young people's lives along the way to help them to be great as well.
So, Sheriff, I hear exposure, access and exposure. I tell our boys all the time, it's really hard to be what you can't see, and I think you're speaking to that. So, Darius.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on what Sheriff just said. When I was 18, I enrolled at Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia, and one of the gifts, NBC, baby, HBCU, born and bred.
Yes, sir.
One of the gifts that I had was being around, and this is to Sheriff's point, people who look like me, Maynard Jackson, Andrew Young, Coretta Scott King. I mean, the list can go on and on. Lawyers, doctors, presidents of companies, large companies, Fortune 5 companies, entertainers, athletes, but I'm hesitant to say that because that's typically the realm that men of color feel like we have to go down this road. But I saw people operating at a very high level, and it normalized excellence and greatness for me.
Yep.
And it gave me a vision of what could be. And it almost set an expectation. I was in this higher education environment where this expectation, where there was accountability, there was structure, there was discipline, and there was an expectation for greatness. I think structurally, and so my mindset shifted. My mindset of what was possible, not just athletics or entertainment, but my mindset of what was possible shifted. I think that's where we have to start, is creating an expectation, a structural and systemic expectation for our black and brown young men that excellence is required of you.
I appreciate that. We have about 3 more. I'm gonna stay with this for about 3 more minutes. I see you guys are writing. I want you to get your thoughts out. So we'll go to Dr. Narcisse and then down to Mike.
So I just want to preface a little bit. I think when you think about black and brown boys, or you just think about anybody from any community, I think we need to redesign schools to help kids to attain socioeconomic mobility. Because the reality is we live in a capitalist country where by design, regardless of the profession, what is magnified is, can you take care of your family? Can you do really well? I mean, you go to school, you usually hear a parent at the table say, hey, you know, I want to make sure my child can make sure that they can take care of themselves financially. I mean, this is what you hear. Social media has different versions of it, right? I mean, so like, I think like schools right now, when you think about black and brown boys, and I brought this up before around by design, does not help them to do that. And I can make that argument for a lot of different kids depending on where they are. And so like, why not provide acceleration without worrying about the access? Why not let them do internships early so they can be affirmed in their process? Why not think about how it engages with what it looks like working within their communities so they can give back to their communities? Why not see each of these areas or highlight within various professions? We right now function in an industrial model, and we're trying to ask kids to do something that by design is difficult to do unless you have additional support from family, community structures, church and all that. And the reality is, unless you grow up with that model, right, or you have access to that, you're not gonna get there. I'm a black kid that grew up in New York that spoke another language and learned English in school. My mother and father made it by default, because while my dad was blowing, he worked at the Marriott Marquis in Manhattan off 7th Avenue, and he was a doorman, blowing a taxi for NYU to recruit an Asian professor that was coming from the West Coast, gets into conversation with my father around the periodical table. My dad went to school in the island of Haiti, and he comes to America, and he didn't have enough scholarship to get scholarship in America. And in that one exchange in a conversation, this guy helps my dad go to technical school, which changes my whole family's life. Now, you could say to me, well, I could sit here and pretend like I didn't come from the hood. I could wear a tie and speak proper English. But here's what you don't know. That exchange happened by luck, I would argue. Unintentional. That's what my father used to say to me. My dad said, my goal is for my boys to grow up so they can intentionally be successful. So if a school system designs itself in a particular way around acceleration and make sure access is not an issue, kids can get internship early for workforce development, you're doing things where you can eliminate biases and not hope that an adult will change their approach to things, you can succeed. Now, you're going to fight a lot of people with different belief systems and values about certain groups of folks, depending on their exposure, right? But the reality is, I think, like, a district can't do it on their own. You need police, you need the mayor's office, you need business partners, you need all these other factors to play a role on how you redesign that system to do that. And the reality is, we all know that socioeconomic mobility gives you what? Access. And now you think about America in a totally different way.
I think about, and then we'll go to Mike. You made a point that raised something for me. Belonging should not depend on one person's heroics or chance or luck. I mentioned at the very beginning of this segment of this presentation that it shouldn't depend on which hallway they walk down, which classroom they enter, which teacher they have, which superintendent, which law enforcement officer that they come in contact with. So I'm really appreciative of those comments. And the final thing before I go to Mike is that I call that American seasoning. Our amazing country, American seasoning, can tell you exactly what it values. What does it mean to get a house? What does it mean to get a job? What success looks like? And then deny that opportunity through systemic misalignment, either intentionally or unintentionally, however you want to put it, but deny the opportunity that once you play the game, once you adhere to our social contract, and take it away from you. And some of us are facing that. Superintendent Giles.
Yeah, I am definitely not. I believe when something is well articulated and said, there's no need for me to come and double down or say it again, because this brother over here, my colleague in DPS, said everything that I was thinking with regard to what it would take for us to truly redesign the system. The only thing I would add to that I think is extremely important is that if we were going to really redesign it to uplift and ensure the success of our black and brown students, they got to be at the table with us to talk about what that's going to look like. And they need to have some agency in the development of that design. So that's the only thing that I would add into what my brother over here said.
Absolutely, not doing things with them and not to them. Last thing here, I'm going to ask each one of you to reflect for a moment. Can you name one adult, one institution, or one opportunity that changed the trajectory of your life, and what may have happened had that person or opportunity not existed? And we'll start here with Darius, and we'll work our way down. So one institution, adult, or moment that changed the trajectory of your life, and what may have happened if that didn't happen. D.
I was 15 years old, living with my biological father, and my stepmother in Detroit, Michigan, where I was raised, into sex, drugs, alcohol, you name it. Came into the house high off of marijuana. My stepmother said to me, if you come into this house high one more time, I'm moving you to Atlanta to live with your biological mother, who I hadn't interacted with for 10 years. My stepmother, and I definitely came into the house high again, my stepmother shipped me to Atlanta to live with my biological mother. That move changed the trajectory of my life. I just told you about my experience in Atlanta, graduated high school, graduated college with honors, spent 2 decades growing a career in the nonprofit sector, was recruited into the banking industry, became president and CEO, have a wife and 4 kids, a wife of 23 years, 4 kids, all of them are in college. My life changed because of that moment and the decision that my stepmother made to hold a young boy accountable who needed it.
That's extraordinary. I like to lift up that extraordinary is not enough. It shouldn't take those chance opportunities, so I really appreciate that. Dr. Narcisse.
Yeah, so
If you would, name the person if it's a person. Like, let's keep them alive.
So I would probably say an experience my father went through. You talk about Atlanta, right? So my dad gets a career technical education with my mother, changes our lives. We go from the city to Brooklyn to the suburbs, right? 2 different planets in a little bit, right? And so my father, I told you my mom and dad's from the island of Haiti. It's a third world country. And he goes on this thing called a conference. And he never leaves New York because he goes from Haiti to New York. They go to Haiti, go to Harlem. They ended up moving to Harlem because they thought that's where all the educated black folks were, right? Yeah. So they go there, right? And so they finally get educated through technical education. And he goes on this thing called a conference. And my father, who's a cheapskate, I don't know about your dad, but my dad's very frugal, right? He's complaining about why is the hospital going to spend all this money to send us to go learn at a conference in Atlanta. The reason he's upset about this is because, he's never left New York before. And number 2, it's a little scary to leave, what you're familiar with in terms of your community, right? And remember, he's got educated. He's now working at the hospital, doing all that. He gets down to Atlanta at the conference, and they take him on a tour where? The Atlanta University Center, and he watches Morehouse, Spelman, Clark Atlanta, Mo Brown, all these schools where he sees what? Black men in suits. And I'm one of 3 boys. I'm the middle child. True story. Calls my mother at 2 o'clock in the morning in New York. Now, as you can imagine, my mom is flipping out. I don't know about you guys, Mom, but my mom is always like, what is wrong with this man, right? She asked him, are you doing okay? Are they going to kill you? Because, they never left New York, right? He's like, no. He wants to talk to her because all of these black folks he saw dressed up in suits. After I'm assuming my mother probably yelled at him for, you calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning for this craziness? The next day she has a conversation with him and he tells my dad tells my mom, I don't care where the boys go to school, they got to go to school somewhere in Atlanta. And he brings back all of the applications for the junior college, Georgia State, Morehouse, all these schools, because he says they need to go to college in Atlanta because that's where they can see an abundance of black men in suits. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how I went to college in Atlanta. That was my application process. Now, you ask me why that changed my life? Because my father, with his learning and education, figured out what you see is what you will what? Become. And I would argue that experience changed because when I got to see that in abundance, I then had the confidence to say, hey, I can achieve. And I would argue my wife, who's from Miami, she's from Puerto Rico, she'd make the same argument as a Latina female that she was in that space that she got to see when she went to schools in Florida. It's the same concept.
Thank you for that. We are at lunchtime now, so I'm going to go ahead and let the last 3 panelists respond, and then we'll get out of the way and get away from in between
This
food.
is easy and quick. Institution, my faith in Christ Jesus, number 1. And the people, my mother and my uncle, who really stepped in as my father, introduced me to Christ at a very young age.
My father, Michael Giles, pillar in my life, still is today. I think just going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, the expectations and also setting a model for me, watching him work hard every day so that whatever he asked me to do, he can say that, I did this so you can see it being done and believe that you can do it.
Thank you.
So many people I could have chose. Probably my uncle, who used to come and pick me up on the weekends while my dad was in and out of prison and the jail that I'm now the sheriff of. My uncle would come and get me and show me what manhood was. He drove the 15 bus for RTD and retired from them, but every weekend he would show me what manhood was.
Thank you, thank you. We're going to close here. So one of the dangers in conversations about boys and young men of color is that we spend too much time discussing outcomes and not enough time examining the systems that produce them. The outcomes that we see today did not happen by accident. They are the results of policies, practices, expectations, investments, and leadership decisions. And so what you've heard today is that the future of boys and young men of color is not simply a youth issue, it's a systems issue. It's a leadership issue, and ultimately, it is a democracy issue. The question is not whether boys and young men of color have talent. The question is whether our institutions are designed to recognize it, to develop it, and to respond to it consistently. Because when opportunity depends on luck, then talent is wasted. When opportunity becomes predictable, then talent is visible. And when talent becomes visible, then communities become stronger, economies become stronger, and democracies become stronger. Thank you for being a part of this conversation.